I was 68 this spring, everything finally snapped, though people kept telling me I looked younger for my age. I never believed them. The mirror doesn't lie, and mine had been showing the same tired man for years now. A man with thinning gray hair, a jaw that had softened, and eyes that carried the pale tint of someone who had learned to live with silence. My house smelled like old apples most days. Eleanor loved apples, kept bowls of them in every room, like little red lanterns of comfort. Even now, 5 years since she'd been gone, the scent lingered in the wooden drawers in the pantry, in the hollow spaces behind the radiator. Some mornings it made me smile. Others it felt like a hand pressing gently on my ribs, reminding me what used to be. I didn't have children of my own. Eleanor and I tried. God knows we tried. But life had its own plans. So my closest family, if you could call it that, was my nephew Mark, my sister's boy. Tall, handsome, always in a hurry, always with a new phone, new jacket, new crisis. He was 32, but spoke with the confidence of someone who believed the world owed him clean sidewalks and convenient parking. "Uncle Henry, you home?" His voice carried through the door on a Tuesday evening in April. No knock. He'd stopped knocking months ago. I was in the kitchen, standing over a small pot of chicken noodle soup, the canned kind. The soup barely bubbled. I kept the flame low to save the pot from scorching. Eleanor hated scorched pots. "Ruins the smell of the kitchen," she used to say. "In here," I called, turning off the stove. Mark walked in without looking around, his shoes leaving small wet prints on the tile. It had rained earlier, one of those heavy spring rains that washed winter dust out of the gutters and made the whole street smell like wet concrete. He glanced at the pot. "Soup again." "Soup is easy," I replied. "Sure," he said, already distracted. He pulled out a stack of envelopes from his backpack. Fat ones, thin ones, the kind that made my stomach tighten. "I brought your mail." It was piling up again. "I was going to get to it tomorrow." "That's what you said last week." His tone sharpened, not openly rude, just coated with something hard and impatient. He spread the letters on the table, bills, statements, a catalog I never ordered. His fingers hovered over one envelope, tapping at the corner. "This one's important." "Why?" I asked, even though I already suspected. "It's from Denver Trust, about the house." He gave me a quick look, calculating. "You know, Uncle Henry, we really should get your paperwork updated. I talked to a guy, financial advisor friend, and he said we could streamline everything for you." "Streamline?" I echoed, sitting down slowly. "Yeah, make things easier. You're still handling everything manually. A power of attorney would simplify stuff. Just a precaution." The word precaution slid across the table like an oily coin. I reached for my soup bowl, more for something to do with my hands and because I was hungry. "I've managed fine so far." He sighed loudly. "Uncle, come on. Nobody's accusing you of being old, but things happen. If you had a fall or forgot something important, I don't forget important things." My voice came out sharper than I intended. His eyebrows twitched upward, surprised. "Okay," he said, holding up his hands. "Just trying to help." Help. People always say that right before they start chiseling pieces off your life. Outside, a car splashed through a puddle. Somewhere in the living room, the old grandfather clock chimed 7. The chime's slightly off-key now, ever since Mark bumped into it last Thanksgiving while stumbling around looking for the Wi-Fi password. He leaned back in the chair, crossing one leg over the other. His shoes were new black leather, barely creased. "Actually, since we're talking about responsibilities, I want to ask you something. Small thing. Just temporary." Here it came. "My car insurance doubled this month. Total scam. I could use a little help closing the gap, just until next paycheck." "How much?" I asked quietly. $8,400. He said it like it was the price of a sandwich. "That's not a small thing, Mark." "It is to me. And you're sitting on a paid-off house and savings. We're family." Family. A word stretched thinner every year. I didn't answer. I looked at the steam rising from the soup, thin, timid, like it didn't want to intrude. Eleanor used to make soup so thick it felt like a meal hugging you from the inside. "You know," Mark continued, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret, "it's not good for you to be alone in this big house. You should let me help manage things. For your own good." The phrase pressed against my chest like a cold hand. I studied him. The perfect hair, the expensive watch, the thin impatience around his mouth. Something in my ribs tightened. Something old, something that had been sitting quietly for months, maybe years. "Mark," I said softly, "why do you really want a power of attorney?" He blinked. "Just once. Quick. For convenience." But his eyes slid away, toward the hallway, toward the framed photo of Eleanor on the wall, toward the staircase where her voice still lingered in dust and memory. He looked away from the photo too quickly, and for the first time, a small spark of suspicion lit inside me. Faint, but unmistakable. Something was wrong. Not deeply wrong yet, but wrong enough to shift the air in the room. He stood up, gathering his backpack. "Think about it, Uncle Henry. I'm only trying to make your life easier." After he left, the house felt colder. I sat alone at the kitchen table, the soup now lukewarm, untouched. Outside, the rain began again, a slow, steady tapping against the window pane. I stared at the envelopes, at Mark's wet footprints fading on the floor. And though I couldn't explain why yet, I felt the first quiet warning move through me. Easier for whom? The next few weeks passed the way April always passes in my town, with mud on the sidewalks, cold mornings that trick you into wearing the wrong jacket, and evenings that smell faintly of thawing earth and someone else's barbecue. But underneath all that, something else had started to thaw too. A suspicion, a quiet dread I couldn't quite name. Mark came by more often, not out of affection. That much was clear, but with the predictable rhythm of a man tending a machine he expected to inherit soon. "Uncle Henry," he would call out, letting himself in again. "You got a minute?" He never asked if it was a good time. It was always a minute, always assuming my life was an open drawer he could pull at will. On a Thursday in late April, he appeared with a stack of papers under one arm and a cup of overpriced coffee in the other. I was sitting at the dining table, sanding down the edge of an old picture frame Eleanor had loved. The wood was soft, smooth, comforting, something I could control with my hands, unlike everything else. "You busy?" he asked, glancing at the sawdust. "I am," I said, "but come in." He dropped the papers on the table. "I'm in a bind again. Car repairs this time. The transmission. Piece of junk failed out of nowhere." "How much?" I asked quietly. $22,000. He said it with a straight face, like $22,000 was the sort of thing a man could find between couch cushions. "That's not a transmission repair," I said. "That's—" "Look, I know it is," he cut me off, pacing. "But the mechanic, give me a deal, okay? And I need to pay by Monday." He stopped pacing and fixed his eyes on me. Something sharp flickered there. Desperation, greed, entitlement. It was hard to tell them apart anymore. "You've always helped me out," he said. "And I'm trying, Uncle." "Really? But things are tough. You know how expensive life is right now." "Life has always been expensive," I replied, wiping the sanded wood with a cloth. "It's not new." He frowned. "You don't understand." Maybe I didn't. Maybe the world had changed too much. Or maybe Mark had simply grown used to thinking every problem of his was mine to solve. He sat down, exhaling dramatically. "Could you transfer me the money tonight? Please." I wouldn't ask if I had another option. I studied the grain of the wood under my fingertips. Eleanor used to say that wood remembers every hand that touches it. I wondered what my face remembered, what memories it showed to Mark that made him think I was his personal safety net. "I'll think about it," I said at last. Mark didn't like that answer. His jaw tightened, his leg bounced. His fingers tapped the table. "There's nothing to think about," he insisted. "It's family. Family." Again, he left in a hurry, frustrated. The smell of burnt caramel from his coffee lingered in the room long after he was gone. He didn't call that weekend, or on Monday, but on Tuesday morning, I came downstairs and found him already in my living room. "Spare key," he explained when he saw my expression. "You gave it to me last year, remember?" I remembered, but the way he said it made it sound like he considered the house a shared property rather than a place he was invited into. He was holding one of my folders, the blue one that had Eleanor's name neatly written on the spine, a folder he had no business touching. "What are you looking for?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Nothing," he said too quickly, sliding the folder back into the drawer. "Just checking in, making sure you're keeping up with paperwork." "By going through my things?" He laughed nervously. "You always get so touchy. I'm trying to help you stay organized, but you're the one rearranging everything." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Uncle Henry, you need to stop being so defensive. I know what I'm doing. That sentence sat between us like a heavy stone. He shifted gears. So about the money? I didn't say yes. He didn't say no either. The silence stretched long enough to become its own answer. He rubbed his face with both hands. Fine, fine. But I'm warning you, this car situation is serious. I'm sure it is, I said, but my savings are not a bottomless well. His mouth twitched with irritation. I'm not asking for charity. Yes, I said softly. You are. He swung his backpack over his shoulder and walked out, not slamming the door, but closing it firmly enough to make the glass tremble. But the final blow came 2 weeks later. It was early May. I woke up to the sound of rustling downstairs, drawers opening, papers shifting. I walked down the hallway and found Mark standing in my office, his back to me, my file cabinet half open. He didn't turn around. Where do you keep the house deed? He asked casually. For a moment, everything in my body went still, my breath, my heartbeat, the warmth of my fingers. Even the dust in the air seemed to pause. Why do you need that? I managed. He finally turned. My friend's working on some refinancing options. You could get a great rate, unlock equity, maybe even hand off management to someone who actually knows what they're doing. Hand off what? I asked. The property, bills, maintenance, all that stuff you struggle with. I stared at him. I am not struggling. He exhaled, loud, like a parent fed up with a child. You forget things. You move slower. You get confused. I am not confused. But there it was, the thin, glistening film of his real thought. You're getting old. You're getting easy to push. I don't need refinancing, I said. And I don't need you going through my documents. Mark shrugged. I'm just looking out for the future. Your future or mine? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. And that was the night I realized something unmistakable. Mark wasn't circling me because he cared. He was circling me the way a man circles a house that he's already imagining with his furniture in it. A house that smelled like old apples. A house he believed would be his soon enough. And for the first time, a quiet spark inside me, something small, something stubborn, began to glow warmer. Not fear, not anger. A beginning of a plan. It happened on a Wednesday. Funny how disasters rarely wait for the dramatic hours of night. They're like morning's quiet ones, when a man is still groggy, still trusting, still unarmored. I'd stepped outside to sweep the porch. The air smelled of lilacs from Mrs. Donnelly's bush next door, and the sun was just warm enough to make the wooden boards creak softly under my slippers. A peaceful morning, the sort that makes you think the world isn't so cruel after all. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Mark calling. I let it ring out. I wasn't ready for another plea, another temporary crisis, another lecture about my age disguised as concern. I went back to sweeping. What I didn't hear was a click signaling the call had connected to voicemail. What I didn't expect was that my phone, slipped halfway from my pocket, would stay on. What I didn't anticipate was hearing voices. At first, just muffled words. Then clearer. Then unmistakable. Mark's voice. And a woman's. His girlfriend, Tara. The one with the too bright smile and the hungry eyes. I'd met her twice. Both times she'd looked at my house the way a realtor looks at a property with potential. I froze mid-sweep, broom suspended like a photograph. I swear baby's being stubborn, Mark said, irritated. He still thinks he's perfectly capable of managing his finances. A laugh, Tara's, low and sharp, as if the man forgets where he puts his keys. You said he burned a pot last month. That was nothing, Mark said. But he's slowing down. You can see it. He just needs a little push. A pause. Footsteps. They were walking somewhere. Sounded like a parking garage. Did you find the deed? Tara asked. No, Mark's frustration was palpable. He hides things, and he gets all defensive when I try to help. Help? She repeated, mocking. You mean manage what'll be yours eventually? Silence. Then Mark's voice, quieter, heavier. It will be mine. The house alone is worth at least $380. Maybe more now with the market going crazy. My hand tightened around the broom handle. I swallowed, once feeling something hot rise in my chest. Tara spoke again, almost with a shrug. He's old, Mark. He doesn't have kids. You're the closest thing he's got. He won't last forever. And honestly, that house is too big for someone his age. Yeah, Mark said bitterly. The sooner we get things in order, the better. The broom fell from my grasp and clattered on the wooden boards. But the call hadn't disconnected. He trusts you, Tara continued. If you get him to sign over power of attorney, everything else falls into place. Exactly. Once I have POA, we can refinance, extract equity, maybe even sell the place entirely, put him somewhere smaller, somewhere manageable. The word manageable made my stomach twist. And what about him? Tara asked. A short, careless laugh from Mark. He'll adjust. Or he won't. Old people don't need much. Old people. Not my uncle. Not Henry, who raised me after Dad left. Not the man who paid for my braces, my textbooks, my deposit on my first apartment. Old people. They don't need much. The call ended abruptly, or maybe my phone just died. I can't remember. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in the porch chair Eleanor used to sun-dry herbs in, staring at the street like it was a foreign landscape. A breeze swept across the yard, carrying pollen and dust and something faintly bitter, maybe regret. But the bitterness wasn't mine. It belonged to the lie that had lived quietly in this house for years. He's your family. He would never hurt you, except he would. He was trying. He'd learned how to disguise it under concern. I sat there for a long time, long enough to feel my pulse slow, long enough for anger to surface, not as a flame, but as a steady, deliberate heat. When I finally stood up, my knees cracked, but my resolve didn't. I walked back inside the house, Eleanor's house, my house, and placed my phone on the kitchen counter. Then I said aloud to no one, "He thinks I'm old." A pause. "He thinks I'm done." My voice was shockingly calm. Eleanor had always said that real anger doesn't run in with its fist raised. Real anger walks in quietly. Real anger stands still long enough to plan. And so I began to plan. The first step was simple. I called up the lawyer, not the family lawyer Mark always mentioned. No, someone new. Someone who owed me nothing and would tell me the truth, even if it hurt. "Mr. Weaver," the lawyer said over the phone after listening to my story, "you need to secure your assets immediately, starting today. You're being targeted for financial exploitation." "By my own nephew," I said bitterly. "It happens," she answered gently. I didn't like the softness in her voice. It made me feel like a victim. I wasn't a victim. Not yet. And God help me, I wasn't going to become one. I thanked her, wrote down a list of actions, closed every drawer in the house with a firmness I hadn't felt in years. From that moment forward, I played a part, the part Mark expected, the forgetful old man, the hesitant one, the one who needed help. I made tea with trembling hands. I asked him to repeat things. I sighed like I was overwhelmed with bills. Let him think the fruit was ripe. Let him get comfortable enough to reach for it. Because I wanted him close enough to gather evidence, close enough to make his intentions undeniable. I may have been old, but I was not done. And the next time Mark walked into my house unannounced, smiling that same calculating smile, I smiled back. For the first time, I wasn't afraid. For the first time, I knew exactly who he was. And for the first time, I knew exactly what I was going to do with that knowledge. It's a strange thing, preparing to defend yourself against someone you once lifted onto your shoulders to watch fireworks. Strange, but not impossible. After the phone call, the one he didn't know I heard, the world around me shifted, not in a violent way, but in a quiet, decisive click, like a lock turning, like a door closing gently, but permanently. I didn't feel fear anymore. What I felt was clarity. And clarity, I discovered, is an old man's sharpest weapon. The first step was simple. I made coffee. Good coffee. French roast. The kind Eleanor said tasted like warm earth. I sat at the table, sipping slowly as I looked at the list my lawyer had sketched for me during our second call. Her handwriting was neat, small, confident. Mine trembled slightly as I copied it down into a notebook Eleanor had once used for recipes. Close vulnerable accounts. Remove nephew's access to anything, keys, financials, digital, physical. Document every suspicious request or visit the DO not confront. Keep playing along. Create a living trust. Transfer the house immediately. Prepare for attempted coercion. Expect escalation. I traced my finger over the last line. Expect escalation. She wasn't wrong. When people like Mark feel control slipping, they tighten their grip. They get louder, angrier, more careless. And I needed him careless. The second step, I closed the accounts. I walked into the bank wearing my best jacket. The brown one Eleanor always said made my shoulders look strong. The young teller smiled too politely. Maybe she thought I was there to deposit a birthday check or ask about CDs like most folks my age. I want to remove an authorized user, I said. Of course, sir. Name, my nephew. Her eyebrows lifted by a millimeter. Okay, and you want to remove all access? All of it. When she printed the confirmation sheet, I folded it neatly into my jacket pocket. The paper felt like armor, like the first brick in a wall between me and disaster. Next, passwords, locks, pins, card replacements. A digital rebirth, complicated but soothing. For the first time in years, every account, every safe, every door belonged solely to me. Afterward, I changed the locks on the house. No more walking in unannounced. No more rummaging through my documents. The locksmith worked quickly, but he glanced at me more than once, maybe wondering why an old man was changing the locks on a house that looked perfectly safe. Safe. If only he knew. Step 3. I started collecting evidence. This part felt theatrical, even exciting. I bought a cheap notebook at the pharmacy. Bright yellow, impossible to confuse with anything else. In it, I recorded every visit, every phone call, every small favor Mark requested. I added dates, times, exact words. And then I added recordings. My lawyer instructed me on the legality. Colorado was a one-party consent state. I only needed my consent, and I had it in abundance. So I placed a small recorder in the living room drawer, another under the hallway table, and a third under a stack of gardening catalogs. The first recording I captured was almost comically perfect. Mark walked in, again without calling. Uncle, about that loan. It was $22,000 last time, I said meekly. This is different, he sighed. It's about your house. My house. He exhaled loudly. Yes, Uncle. You can't take care of it alone. I talked to a guy who can handle refinancing, but I need you to sign a few papers. What kind of papers? Just authorizing paperwork. You don't need to understand every detail. I could practically hear the lawyer in my head whisper, let him talk, feed the fire, record everything. So I blinked at him, pretending confusion. Maybe I should read them. No offense, he said, shrugging, but this might be a bit too complicated for you now. The recorder blinked, its silent red eye in the drawer. I smiled faintly and nodded. I trust you, Mark. His posture relaxed instantly. Greed always loosens a man. Step 4, the living trust. This was the invisible hammer. I spent 2 afternoons at the lawyer's office, surrounded by books and framed certificates and the quiet buzz of a copier down the hall. We talked numbers, property transfer laws, long-term provisions. My house, the one Mark wanted so badly, was placed into a private trust named after Eleanor. The Eleanor Weaver Heritage Fund. A trust that Mark couldn't touch. A trust that would outlive him. A trust that would fund 3 scholarships every year for local students studying horticulture. Eleanor's field. I signed the documents with a steady hand. For a moment afterward, I felt something I hadn't felt since Eleanor died. Lightness. A release. The house was safe. My fate was safe. And Mark had no idea. Step 5. I prepared for confrontation. It didn't require much imagination to predict how Mark would act when he realized I wasn't complying. Desperation makes people sloppy, and desperate men show their true colors. So I staged the house a bit, not dramatically, just enough. I left bills on the table. I left a reading glass out, like I'd forgotten it. I left mail unopened. I asked Mark small, confused questions each time he visited. He grew bolder, more arrogant, more certain I was slipping. Perfect. On the first Monday of June, he came by with a folder under his arm, a thick one, sealed with a red elastic band. He smiled like a man about to collect on a debt. Uncle Henry, he said brightly, I brought the papers we talked about. All we need is your signature. I stepped aside, letting him in. The recorder under the table blinked its red light. And in that moment, that single fragile moment, I realized he thought he was counting down my steps. But I had already counted his, and I was 2 steps ahead. I always imagined big confrontations happened in dim rooms, behind closed doors, maybe with rain tapping at a window for dramatic effect. But life rarely grants such poetic timing. My confrontation with Mark happened at 2:17 p.m. on a blindingly bright Saturday in my own living room, a room Eleanor once filled with flower cuttings and sunlight, now hosting the beginning of his downfall. He arrived with a confidence that belonged to men who had never truly been told no, a confidence he had sharpened on me for years. I heard him before I saw him, the hurried steps, the squeak of his too clean sneakers, the forced cheerfulness in his voice. Uncle Henry, ready for little paperwork. He didn't notice the new locks when he walked in, or maybe he did, and assumed I'd simply forgotten giving him another key. He wasn't here alone. 2 people followed behind him, a woman in a charcoal suit carrying a clipboard, and a man with an iPad, both professionals, or at least trying to look the part. Uncle, these are specialists, Mark said. They'll walk you through everything. It's very legitimate. I nodded politely. I'm sure it is. Inside my chest, my heartbeat was steady, too steady. I realized I wasn't nervous at all. That absence of fear felt like a new kind of youth. The woman smiled thinly. Mr. Weaver, we understand you'd like to delegate certain financial responsibilities to your nephew. We've prepared documents. Mark, cut in. Just sign where they tell you, Uncle. I sat down slowly at the dining table. I put on my glasses, not because I needed them, but because it made me look older, softer, easier. Across the table, the small recorder hidden under the lace tablecloth blinked its silent red eye. Before we begin, the woman said gently, do you understand what a power of attorney is? Oh, yes, I said, pushing my glasses up my nose. It gives Mark the right to handle everything for me. Exactly, Mark beamed, already pulling his pen from his pocket. And, I continued, to sell the house if he wanted. The woman nodded. If he deems it in your best interest, yes. Mark interrupted again, too quickly. Just as a formality, Uncle, you don't need to worry about the details. His voice held impatience, now almost eagerness. He pushed the first page toward me. Sign here. I picked up the pen, held it, did not sign. Instead, I looked up very calmly. Mark, would you mind reading aloud what this document does? He blinked. What? Why? It's part of my process, I said. Humor me. The woman looked uneasy. It is rather long. All the better, I said. Mark smirked. Fine. He skimmed instead of reading, summarizing casually. It just gives me the right to manage your accounts, handle the property, talk to the bank. Sell the house? I asked. A beat. He hesitated. Well, if necessary, but only to help you. To help me, I repeated. You know you can't keep up with the place, he said, louder now. You forget things. You get confused. It's dangerous for you to be alone here. The man with the iPad shifted uncomfortably. I set the pen down, folded my hands, and smiled. You know, I said softly, my lawyer had an interesting comment when I explained everything. Mark froze. You're a lawyer? His voice cracked. Yes, I said pleasantly, that I should expect escalation once I started protecting my assets. The woman straightened. I'm sorry, Mr. Weaver, you have counsel? Yes, I said, and she advised me to gather evidence. Mark's face drained a color. I reached under the table and pressed a small button on the recorder. His voice filled the room. Clear, sharp, unmistakable. Tara's laugh. Mark's voice. He won't last forever. That house is worth $380. Old people don't need much. Once I get POA, we can sell the place. The woman's clipboard sagged. The man with the iPad swallowed hard. Mark's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I stood up, slow, steady, and placed a thick envelope on the table. Mark, I said, my voice gentle like I was talking to a child. This is a court-issued notice. You're being investigated for attempted financial exploitation of a senior. He stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. I wasn't done. You'll also find a cease and desist order prohibiting you from entering my home, contacting me, or accessing any of my accounts. His breath hitched. You can't do this. You already did, I said quietly. I'm just responding. This is insane, he sputtered, looking between the stunned consultants. He's confused. He's old. He doesn't understand. The woman raised a hand sharply. Mark stopped talking. But he didn't. He was unraveling right in front of me. You owe me, Mark shouted. You paid for my braces, my school, My first apartment. You can't just cut me off. The rage in his voice cracked into something uglier, something desperate. You were supposed to give me the house. I've been waiting. He choked on the last word. Waiting. Yes. Waiting for me to falter. Waiting to take. The woman stepped back, already dialing her phone. We're terminating our service. This is a legal matter now. We cannot be involved. The man followed her out. Mark was left standing in my living room, shaking with fury. Get out, I said softly. He didn't move. Get out. This time my voice thundered. Not because I was angry, I wasn't, but because in that moment I felt Eleanor beside me, steadying my spine. Mark stumbled backward, then another step. Then he fled, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. The silence afterward was heavy, but not lonely. I picked up the recorder, switched it off, and placed it neatly into the evidence folder. Then I stood there, breathing slowly, the afternoon sun warming the back of my neck. For the first time in a long while, my house felt like mine again. Mark didn't vanish from my life easily. Men, like him, never do. When entitlement has been fed for years, it doesn't starve quietly. It thrashes. It claws at any door still cracked open. The morning after the confrontation, 7:42 a.m., a time decent people reserve for coffee and silence. My phone vibrated against the kitchen counter. Not rang. Vibrated. He tried calling earlier, I later learned, but the restraining order blocked his number. So he tried the loophole, an unknown caller ID. I let it buzz twice. Then again. Then again. Finally, I picked up. A frantic voice burst out immediately. Rushed, breathless. Angry at the world for not bending to him. Uncle Henry, listen. This is all a misunderstanding. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, I said. Please, let me come over and explain. You should speak to your attorney, I replied, and ended the call. The phone stayed silent after that. Later that afternoon, my lawyer phoned with the tone of someone carrying news they'd already prepared in neat folders. She told me the district attorney had reviewed the recordings, every clipped sentence, every greedy laugh, every whispered plan to take my home, and found them more than sufficient. Charges for attempted exploitation were being filed. The restraining order was in full effect. Mark could not step foot near my property or contact me again. Oddly enough, I didn't feel triumphant, just steadier, lighter, like someone had tightened a bolt inside me that had rattled loose for years. Word traveled quickly, as it always does in small towns. The specialists Mark brought to my living room were fired within days, not because they had knowingly conspired, but because they'd failed to recognize the obvious. Their company released a statement about ethical oversight and client protection, the sort of polite language corporations use when wiping their hands clean. Mark didn't weather the fallout well. His job let him go, citing behavior inconsistent with company values. His girlfriend, Tara, posted something dramatic online about betrayal, emotional manipulation, and toxic elder narratives. The next day, she deleted all photos of them together and disappeared from his life entirely. If I'm honest, I don't think she left him. I think she left the house she thought she'd eventually live in. Meanwhile, my own days began to take on a surprising gentleness. I reopened all the curtains Eleanor once insisted on keeping wide to let the light in. The sun drifted across the floor in long bands again, warming the hardwood she polished every spring. I made her blueberry pancakes one morning, her recipe still taped to the inside of a cabinet door. I found myself eating them slow, savoring the quiet, imagining her humming in the next room. Out in the garden, the tulips she planted years ago had pushed through, without permission, stubborn and bright. I knelt to pull weeds and felt her hand guiding mine, the way she used to when teaching me which leaves to spare. For a few weeks, peace felt like a guest I was learning to live with again. But men like Mark don't go quietly, not until the very last thread is cut. It happened just after sundown. I was reading in my armchair when I heard the rattling of the front doorknob. Not frantic, just entitled, like someone who believes the lock is a mistake that will eventually give. Then came his voice, muffled but unmistakable. Uncle Henry, please, just talk to me. I didn't move, didn't answer. A pause, then more rattling. A shaky exhale, a short, angry thud on the door. Then the voice of my neighbor, Mrs. Donnelly, sharp as pruning shears. Mark, you can't be here. I'm calling the police right now. Footsteps. Running. A car door slammed. An engine revved and tore down the street. The next morning, my lawyer informed me he'd violated the restraining order. Additional penalties were being filed. And just like that, he was gone from my life for good. What remained was the house, still smelling faintly of Eleanor's apples and lavender soap, and the quiet, not the fearful quiet that haunted me before, but a clean quiet, a rightful quiet. The trust in Eleanor's name was finalized. 3 young students wrote me letters folded perfectly, written with gratitude that was honest, unpolished, and real. I kept the letters on my coffee table. For the first time in a long time, something in this house felt like it was growing rather than being taken. These days, I sit in the living room in the evenings, slicing apples the way Eleanor used to, thin, almost translucent. The grandfather clock ticks softly behind me. I breathe easier than I have in years. No footsteps I dread. No voices dripping with expectation. No hands reaching for things that are mine. Life did not return to what it once was, but it settled into something better than fear. Something I had forgotten how to expect. A life that belongs to me, fully, quietly, peacefully. Mark believed I was nearing my end. He believed I was weak, distracted, fading. But he was wrong. I wasn't nearing the end at all. I was simply closing a door he was never meant to walk through again.